Well, hello, Liberty listeners. Welcome to another episode of Liberty Road. Today, you guys get to hear from an expert, somebody who's literally been there, done that, and is going to share with us how she did that and how she helps other people do that. Today, you guys get to hear from Mandy Lehto. And I'm so excited to have her on the show, not only to share her expertise and her wisdom, but to unpack some of these nuggets that I've heard her say as she and I have had conversations that I've never heard anybody else say before. And I wanted you guys to hear it directly from her. So Mandy, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to play with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. And I realized, my apologies, it's Dr. Mandy Lehto. Forgive me. I should have said that.
We're
at the
amongst
top of the
friends
show.
here. That's
well,
fine.
Thank you. Thank you. So why don't you just give our listeners some context? How did you come into coaching?
I came into coaching a little bit puzzled because coaching in the UK wasn't really a thing back in the day. I was an investment banker. I was on maternity leave with my second child. I was having one of those fork in the road moments thinking, I cannot think of anything worse than going back into my banking job. It's like, I would rather poke forks into my eyes than go back into that role because I knew what was required of me and I was over it. So I actually took my then very small baby and went to see a coach. And she did all these psychometric tests on me. And we sat there. My little baby was in the carrier on the floor next to me. And I'm feeding her. And we're having this chit chat back and forth. She said, "You'd actually be a great coach." And I thought, that never occurred to me. But when I actually looked back on my career, and we talked about this briefly, that's what I was doing a lot in my banking career. I was less interested in where the markets were, and I was more interested in the human drama and about active listening and about really letting people unspool their thoughts. So I was the place where people would often come to think things through. But I didn't know that was a job back then. Coach brought up the word tube socks and a whistle, like you thought about hockey or basketball, something along those lines. And in a previous iteration of my career, I came to this country. I'm Canadian, which is why I sound like this. I came to the UK to do a doctorate. And I fell out of love with that en route. But again, the thing that was really interesting to me was working as a teaching assistant and supporting people on their journey and, having long, deep, meaningful conversations, listening, asking questions. I did my PhD in history, and that's what we do. We ask loads of questions and we poke at things. So I realized that there was, there's a long back trail to this that goes even further back. When I think back to the jobs I had as a teenager, I was leading people. I was a fitness instructor in a sort of Terry headband and spandex leotard, Jane Fonda kind of thing, that kind of situation, leading people through hard things and offering loads of encouragement. And even farther back, one of the first jobs I ever had was working in a funeral home.
Oh my gosh.
Most of my friends were working in Dairy Queen or McDonald's or somewhere else. And here's me working in a funeral home, which was really insightful because it really gave me a perspective to get over myself. Because all of this ends. And it was a little bit creepy doing that as a 15-year-old girl, but I realized the breadcrumb trail of all the major pivots, both personally and professionally, have brought me to this place that now I use the title coach, executive coach, but I'm really drawing on all sorts of different things that have nothing whatsoever to do with coaching.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that, because I think many of our listeners find themselves at some sort of impasse, whether it's, circumstances have shifted for them and perhaps they need to start thinking about what's next vocationally. For some, it's a lack of satisfaction, much like you were talking about. And I think for some, it's even less about a lack of satisfaction in the work, but a sense that that's not what the actual call of their life is. Like something is not in alignment. My work is fine. I'm doing the thing that I've been doing for X amount of time, but there's something that's not in alignment with who I believe that I am or I could be or was meant to be. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you've tapped into all of those things at various points. I'm curious, when your coach, the woman you saw with your little baby in the carrier, When she said to you, you should be a coach, what do you think she saw in you that led her to say that?
I was probably asking her loads of annoying questions.
She's like, let me turn this around.
I think that was it. I wanted to see the movie in my head of what my life could be, because there were certain things that were no longer important to me. This thing about purpose was super different in my 20s. It morphed into something different when I got my PhD, and it morphed into something different again when I left that industry and went into banking. So this idea of this constantly shifting purpose made me realize that I needed a career that could accommodate shifting priorities, shifting purposes in my life. Like suddenly there were more than one, what do you call multiple purposes? Purposes that before I could single focus. You know, when you're a woman in your 20s and you're just gunning it for career progression and all those things that are important. Suddenly those things didn't feel as important anymore when I had two little people to look after, and I had reached what I now to be bore out in my banking career. And looking at the next possible steps, it just didn't delight me. So I think it was this realization too that purposes morph over time. And as just, of course they do, as we shift from being a single person to, if you're in a pairing of some sort, if you have a partner, if you have children, if you have pets, like all of a sudden things that seemed so important in your 20s, 30s, 40s, at some stage look completely different, which is normal.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question about leaving those very successful trajectories. You had a PhD in history. That's a hard thing to leave when you've put so much into that. Having success as an investment banker, it's a really hard thing to leave, whether it's the title, the money, the years that you've put into it. What gave you the audacity to leave such things? And how did you give yourself permission to start over?
Well, I wish I could say I had all of this sass and audacity, and some days I did. Some days I was just a smoldering mess as well. Let's keep it real. I think with the leaving history, the not going into that career was, I'm just going to be upfront about it. I couldn't get a job. I probably would have gone in that direction. I was coming out, I had a PhD from Cambridge University, and I was applying for jobs that I was in competition with people who were already had written books at that stage and who were much older than I was. And I was, I suppose, a little too green, or competing in pools where they were much more seasoned people than I was. And I see that in hindsight as a blessing. It was one of those universe redirects that I couldn't have seen. I was just broken by applying for job after job after job, rejection after rejection after rejection. So that one was not of my choice, but in hindsight, I am so glad that that didn't work out for me. A rejection is a redirection, and I did not know that at the time. So keeping it super real there. That one was not of my choice, but in hindsight, super glad it happened. Then I ended up completely randomly getting a job in investment banking and was on a desk with all my Bloomberg screens. And I really didn't have any training for this aside from reading the Financial Times How to Spend It magazine every once in a while. It was a vertical learning curve. They thought, okay, you've got a PhD, you've got a big brain, let's go. We can do this. And the learning curve was, it was the Everest of learning curves. And there's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and there's a lot at stake. And it was a very intense time. It was kind of fun having that sort of a challenge. But on the other hand, I'm a nerd. I'm a creative. I am somebody who loves people. I'm not that interested in the financial markets. So whilst I could do it and be well paid for it and be good at it, and from the outside it looked shiny and glamorous, it didn't feel aligned with what I really deeply wanted to do. It was one of those things that I fell into it and I succeeded at it until I realized that this isn't for me anymore. I think it was a knowing that was noodling up from my belly, and I was trying not to know it for quite some time because it was inconvenient. So the busyness kept that kind of numbed out for a while.
Yeah.
But then being on maternity leave and actually having time and space to do the things that light me up, like the Times Square Christmas tree. And I did not read the Financial Times once, or I had no desire to look at my BlackBerry. I was not, that part of my life disappeared very quickly, and I wasn't thinking about it. So I knew that was a big sign, and I knew that it would be a mistake to go back into that world.
So then you leave the financial world that you had successfully, again, created for yourself. And I use the word successfully over and over just to say that you weren't forced out. You had achieved whatever. And so this was a very intentional pivot. Where do you start? You decide, I liked meeting with my coach, and she said I could be a coach. And now I know coaches aren't just people with whistles and tube socks. Where does one begin? And did you intentionally choose executive coach because that was a world that you had been surrounded with, and you knew the pain points of some of those people that you had been working alongside?
Let's start with the first question. How did I know? I think it wasn't that I knew, it was that I stopped not knowing. I probably always knew this. I think it was a bit of desperation, having completed the PhD, knowing I need to get a job and where am I going to go? So this was just a direction that I would have never seen coming. I enjoyed it. We had our time together, and then it was time to part ways, because that knowing from the pit of my stomach and the knowing from my heart, and having spent time with my daughter, not wanting to go back, knowing what would have been required of me to get to the next level, I just had to sit there and look all of that in the eye. I think my busyness before I had been on maternity leave and for the years running up to that had helped me not to know that. So all of a sudden, when I had this period of not being in that intense busyness, I mean, it is intense having a newborn, but it's a different type of intensity. That truth was so in my face that I thought, okay, I can do hard things. How do I deal with this? And I was waiting for some sort of epiphany of clarity or some sort of a golden nugget that was going to say, this is what you should do. But I was flapping around all over the place. It was uncertain. It was messy. I had people I trusted from my banking world telling me, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So it really, I went through this period of being absolutely certain and then oscillating to being, I have no idea what I'm doing, and back and forth and back and forth. So I just want to say that's totally normal. If your emotional life is in the tumble dryer, just going around and around and around, that was me. So first of all, I think there's the looking the truth of your soul and heart in the eye. The second is be willing to get messy, because I did not have a solution. I just knew that I didn't want to go back. So the only option was going forward. And then figuring that out little by little. I can't remember who said it, but there was somebody who's in a novel, I think it was, that said, you can drive across America only seeing to the end of your headlights. And that's exactly how it felt. I didn't know how the whole picture was going to unfold. I just knew what was in front of me right now, even if that meant this week, or sometimes it was just today. Following that intuition that all of a sudden became super strong when I was willing to listen to my truth, and moving forward to the end of my headlights little by little, and just experimenting, like, would this be different in a different bank? Probably same old, same old. Talking to people, really like starting to see the movies in my head of like, okay, what could a future like that look like? What could this look like? Do I start my own business? Do I go here? Do I go there? Do I change industry? Do I do something creative? So I think I was prepared to be in the mess of it for a while and not need to figure it out. And this again is hindsight speaking, because some days I was like so stressed that I hadn't figured this out. My mood was just up and down and up and down. It's hard being in that place.
Yeah. Thank you for being honest about that, because I do think that even when we get clarity about what's next kind of conceptually, we don't necessarily have that same clarity in these steps that are going to get us to the movie in our head, as you kept saying. And I love what you said about the headlights, because gosh, if we left this podcast with just that nugget, how different would we be living our lives? Just to be fully present, one, but also to have an expectation of ourselves that it's just until the end of our headlight, just until what we can see, that our paths will be directed day by day, that we don't always know how to get to the very end, even though you had sort of a North Star that was coach, right? How was going to reveal itself slowly, and it was going to be messy, as you said.
And I knew to expect that because I had so many, the pivot from history to banking. I mean, that was a pretty radical shift. And just because I had so many odd, seemingly unrelated jobs historically, that I suspected that it was not going to be a candlelit linear path that was going to easily reveal itself. So I knew there was going to be a bit of tussling with discomfort. And I think there was something about being in acceptance of that really allowed me to relax into it when those days came. And they did come. And here's the other thing that emerged, but I didn't see it at the time, was realizing how many big, important, pivotal moments in my life had come about because of some weird mixture of serendipity. I didn't see it coming, a little sprinkle of magic, whatever you want to call it. So there's so much that we can do to drive forward. And then there's always leaving a little space for the unexpected to happen. Like, I am so willing to be delighted and surprised, universe, like, bring it on. I mean, I think about so many of the massive pivots in my life happened because I met a person that I could have never thought I was going to meet, or I went somewhere and something happened, or a door opened that I could have never anticipated. So anticipate the discomfort and also leave a little space for serendipity and magic, because that can be a portal you never saw coming.
Sure. And if there's an expectation that serendipity and magic will happen and you're aware of it, then you know to step into it when it occurs. You don't walk by too quickly, right? When you're like, oh,
exactly,
that may be for me. You mentioned purpose earlier and understanding purpose differently, at this stage in your life than you did in your 20s and 30s. When we spoke, you said something about big P and little p. And I was like, oh, we got to come back to that when I have her on the podcast. Can you describe what you meant by that, or what you mean by that?
I don't think any of us comes onto this planet like a fortune cookie, like with your purpose revealed, that will then one day you'll be cracked open and your purpose will be revealed. I'm willing to be wrong about that, but I don't think that's the case. I think a purpose is, I say this now as a 54-year-old woman. Our purpose is to learn more about ourselves and to love and help others. That's what I think it is for me. I've realized that. In my 20s, I probably would have thought it was to climb the career ladder and get a job with lots of status and money. And maybe that was important. I'm not dismissing that. But there can be these series of purposes that exist, that coexist. Like, there can be a purpose, like, I want to now figure out this next pivot of my life. And those are small p purposes. Like, I need to do this. I need to maybe change how I see myself. I need to step into a new identity. I choose to be different and to do things differently, because that's my purpose in getting from A to B, where it is that I'm leaving space for serendipity. Like, I'm living purposefully in that way, that I am a magnet for magic and magnet for possibility. And I think there's also like a bigger P purpose, like, be a good person. Don't be a jerk. Like, help people when you can. Realize that it's not all about you, which is really what led me to think a lot about the thing that I aspire to be known for on my podcast and on my socials and on the book that I'm writing, which is this idea around enoughness, of how we relate to ourselves and how we are, how we are always coming back to our sense of worth, to our sense of wholeness, which is always there. It's just we don't feel it all the time. So I think one of my big P purposes is to remember that I'm always whole, but I forget sometimes when I compare myself to other people, or I'm having one of those wobbler days, or something else that's happening that's taking my focus away from how unbelievably enough I am. And then there are certain things that can bring us back to that perceived and felt sense of wholeness on a regular basis. For me, that is a major, major purpose right now, to live from that place more of the time and to talk about that and to be a guide for other people to remember how to bring themselves back to that place of wholeness, because we do things differently when we come from that place. We take more risk, not dumb risk, but audacious, that audacity that you were referring to. Like when our come from is coming from a place of I'm already whole and I have nothing to prove, it shifts our relationship with hustle. It shifts our relationship with, I should do this. It shifts our relationship with missing out and all the things. Like, it creates so much alignment when we come from that place. So for me, that's a purpose. It's a North Star. It's something that I'll never necessarily achieve, but it's a direction I walk in. And I think those big P purposes are like, you never get done at loving other people, or you never get done at learning how to ground yourself. These are things that we get up and we do them again and again and again. So I'm still noodling on this, but this is a work in progress, thinking about, these different ways of being with purpose in different seasons of our lives.
I love it. I love it. And you, the word enough and enoughness, this concept is a through line in your podcast. I've listened to several now episodes, and it's the questions you ask, it's the people that you have on, it's the conversation that you lead. So much of it comes back to this concept of enoughness and wholeness. And so that big P for you is being lived out. We're experiencing that because you've made it a priority. I want to just one thing about purpose that I've come to realize, and I would love your thoughts on this, is that there's work, which is what you do in your kind of 20s just to make ends meet. And then you get into career, which is sort of your 30s and 40s. And then you start to long for that impact and that meaning and that purpose. And what I've come to find out for my life is that purpose has to include service. It has to be in service of others. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
This relates to, I can't remember which podcast episode it was, but I referred to one of the longest ever, if not the longest, study of what makes a life well lived that was conducted at Harvard and may still be ongoing. They took a group of men who were, I think, about 18 at the time, and then went on and followed these individuals through their lives, I think in their 80s, and then asked them loads of questions of what made a life well lived for you. And nobody was talking about how much money they had or what it said on their business card. It was really about, who did I help at work? And, this also comes back to the work of Bronnie Ware, who was a hospice nurse, or at the time was a hospice nurse in Australia. And she wrote a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And consistently, as she sat next to people as they transitioned from this life to wherever we go after this, I wish I'd have spent more time with my friends. I wish I'd cared less what other people thought about me. Those sorts of things, of being in connection with other people, supporting one another. I know that this is what ends up really lighting me up, because those other things can feel good temporarily, but it's kind of like a sugar high, at least for me. You've eaten a bag of jelly beans, it's like, woo, and then you come kind of crashing down. But there's something about connection and supporting other people and helping other people to win and being up to something together that has a lasting impact on our happiness and our sense of a life well lived. So yes, 100% agree.
And feels so tied to legacy, what we're leaving behind. Thank you for that. I was curious what your thoughts were on that. I want to also talk about a few Mandyisms, as we're going to call them around here. You and I, again, when we spoke last, you just said all these phrases and I wrote them down because I knew I wanted to come back to them and share them with our audience. One was idea sex. What do you mean when you say idea sex, and why do you think it's important for us?
This is not my term. I can't remember where I read it, but I have not been able to stop thinking about this. Part of this creative weirdo that lives inside of me is I love mashing unusual things together. So as I'm thinking through, I'm listening to a client or I'm thinking about something for my podcast, I love being on the cusp of interesting things. So I love going to restaurants where you have, I don't know, Peruvian, Japanese fusion. Like somebody's brain has put unusual things together. Or when Adidas collaborates with, a high fashion brand, like, what is that about? I love this way of messing with our own thinking by putting unrelated things together and kind of Venn diagramming them in our minds and seeing what is that interesting thing that happens in the middle. So I think particularly when we're in that messy middle stage of trying to figure out a pivot, often I will ask somebody who I'm speaking to or supporting to actually create those kind of mental Venn diagrams of, okay, I love doing this and this lights me up. So we might have like 4 overlaps in a Venn diagram and then thinking like, okay, what could give you that feeling? Like, what is the feeling you're aspiring to, or what is the way in which you want to be of service? So it's a way that we can, not even having a coach, it's a way that we can sit down and get creative with putting unusual things together, whether it's in the kitchen or whether it's in your career, whether it's in how you put clothes together, high fashion, low fashion. I think it's a way of being memorable. It's a way of being playful. It's a way of being expressive. And this idea in my 50s has become more important in part of my purpose pursuit. Like, what does it mean to be Mandy? What does it mean to do things in the way that only I can do them? And how can that be interesting to, be of service to others? And sometimes it doesn't even need to be of service to others. Sometimes it can just be fun to reinterpret things in unusual ways to keep sharpening my creative saw, so to speak. So it's that mashup of the unusual.
Yeah. And even if that thing is not directly in service to others or, fueling your work in some way, it's fueling you, which in essence will fuel the work that you do or the way you show up for your family or friends or your colleagues or your clients. So it can be indirect, but it's of equal import.
I think it's also a way of walking through the world. If you're choosing to walk through the world with a sense of great things are going to happen for me, I am looking for ways, like it's a lens, like I'm looking for ways to surprise and delight the people in my life, my clients, my family. I'm looking for that little glint in people's eyes. I'm looking for the unusual, the quirky, that's something that I'm really, really trying to pay attention to and prioritize in my 50s, because I noticed I was just getting lulled into routine and just getting lulled into the sameness because there had been so many decades of hustling and discomfort. Ooh, comfort is so seductive and creamy, and it's so easy to stay there. But actually, I find that my best ideas and my spark really happens when I'm walking through the world with an intent to see the magic, to be the magic, to find unusual combinations of things. For me, it's a practice. It's a creativity practice for me.
Yeah. And seems like it's something we could so easily adopt, like you said, without a coach, just to spend the time to get those things on paper and see what lights us up. And how those things can inform whatever might be next. Okay, another Mandyism. Okay, wormholes. Ready. What are wormholes?
So this is something that my mentor was talking about. And I was just at NASA in your neck of the woods recently at the Jet Propulsion Labs, geeking out on all things space related. So the way my mentor was talking about this was, think about when you've moved from A to B, I don't know whether it's in a career, let's talk about it in a career context or a life context. I'm here now at point A and I want to get to point B, whatever that might be. Well, most of us will progress through those things linearly from when we have a goal, right? And we'll do all the little steps and plinky plonk our way forward little by little to get from A to B. Now, if you think about your own life for a moment, there have been certain people, circumstances, situations that you put yourself in that actually helped you to jump super quickly. Maybe just a step in the middle and then to point B, or maybe you just jumped all the way to point B. And I think this is also a way of living life, coming back to that audacity point or that creativity point. When we're in transitions, there are wormholes. Think about your historical transitions. So the historical transitions that have made the biggest wormhole leaps for me have been when I reached out to somebody and asked for something. And I was okay to be rejected. So that's actually how a little farm girl who grew up in the sticks with a family that had not much money and zero connections, I had the audacity to reach out to this professor at Cambridge and say, I want to come here and I want you to be my supervisor. And here's why. I'd done my hard yards of telling this person why, and I was fully prepared to be rejected. I thought the dude wouldn't even read my email. So that willingness to put yourself out there and to be rejected, I think that's been something else. Another thing I learned from my mentors, like put yourselves in rooms you're not supposed to be in. And then all of that good girl conditioning, like, no, it's going to feel awkward. And no, but I mean, that's where wormhole moments can happen. Or when I moved countries or when I moved industries, it's just having that feeling somewhere. You don't even need a lot of it. It's this mishmash of gumption, self-belief, and you don't need as much as you think you do. And this understanding that you have figured out everything historically 100% of the time. Even if there was flap and messing and all of the other things that had happened along the way, everything is figure-outable. So it's those couple of ingredients that I've noticed are kind of like things that have made wormholes appear in my life.
Sure. And essential. And we all have those moments. I know I do, of looking back and being like, how did I do that? I don't know, but I did.
Right?
I did.
Yeah.
And somehow I'm here as a result. Okay. Another Mandyism, life force. You talk about, and which we've heard this kind of, these words, but it's your mashup of this. Tell me what you mean by that.
The more I've been thinking about enoughness for the past 10, 12 years and been a student of it and really probed it and thought about it, when we're in that place of alignment, when we intermittently remember who we are and we have that felt sense of our magnificence and our power and our humility and all of those things, it's not an arrogance. It's a very particular sense of our limited editionness and also of our limited time here. And this idea, like, I'm not here to fart around, like, let's go and do something. And like a feeling of groundedness and a feeling of possibility. When I referred to earlier in our conversation, like what becomes possible when we remember who we are, when we remember how utterly enough that we are. So much fear falls away. We walk through life with so much more intent. We see more beauty, or I should speak for myself. I see more beauty. I walk through life with intent. I feel every cell of my body zinging with life. I care differently what people think about me. I'm not going to say I don't care what people think about me, because I do. That would be dishonest. I care what certain people think, but I am also in the equation. It's not about contorting myself to tap dance to be whoever somebody else needs me to be. It's a palpable, zinging, visceral thing that's both full of life and grounded simultaneously. That's my experience. And when we recognize other folks out there who are coming from this place, I want to consciously spend more time with those people. And even if they don't know I exist, I want to put myself in their orbit. So I told you when we spoke last time that I took my teenagers to go and see Lenny Kravitz,
Yes.
who is a tuning fork of life force. This man, he came onto the stage and you could feel like the ripple of Lenniness coming through the audience. It's how he moves. It's his humility. It's his mastery. It's just the unapologeticness of how he is being him in the world. And I felt so topped up also seeing other people living from that come from.
Yeah.
So I think there's something here that I'm a student of this. I'm really sort of truffling around, like trying to figure out who's got this, what is it, how does it manifest? All I know is this so far, Netta, is good things happen when I come from this place. And I'm curious if that's the same for you. Are you resonating with this?
Yeah, it's resonating, and I have chills actually. I think that when we step into or recognize the kind of who we are, the fullness of who we are, you have no choice but to be that, and so it allows how other people respond to you, what they think of you. Yes, those things still impact us, but we just operate from a different place when we're like, well, I kind of have no choice but to be Netta. I've tried to do a lot of other things, and the best thing I can do is be her. And this recognition, I think, of I'm the only her there is. And if I am not fully her, what disservice have I done to me, to my family, to my friends, to this world, to the reason that I am here and exist? What if we each believed that so deeply that we operated from that point of view? How different would the world be? How different would our relationships be? And I love that when you first talked about this, you used the word power and humility, right? This is not an arrogance, as you said. It's not a cockiness. It's not a full of yourself. It is a full of yourself, right?
Yes.
It's a different.
Yes.
It's different. And when we feel full of ourselves, complete in ourselves, whole enough in ourselves, we just operate differently. I'm sad that it took me 50 plus years to really understand that. And I believe that being a mother helped, because I saw so clearly, and I don't think you need to be a biological mother to have this experience, but I think that nurturing something else and seeing something objectively independent of you and saying, oh, you are marvelous in so many ways, I only wished you could see what I see, helped me to, I think, return that nurturing nature to myself, and really helped me to want to launch Liberty Road. You know, that it was like, this needs to be for other people. I need other people to step into that space for themselves and believe that this midlife stage in life is not just a gift of time, it's a gift of opportunity, and finally being free of so many of the things that we're not free of earlier in life, and stepping into who we are fully and wholly, feeling enough. And what can we do when we operate from that? You are just beginning. This is not a time to be shelved. This is a time to move forward. So yeah, you and I we're on the same page, and we're reading the same script. We're seeing the world in a similar way, and seeing others and what we want to do for others in a similar way, which is just another reason that I wanted to have you on the podcast, but not because we're similar, because what I wanted was the Mandiness of it all, and how what you know and have learned can teach us. And I think when you talked even about your years after Cambridge and the rejection, that deep empathy you probably built from that rejection is probably part of your gifting to other people too, and your ability to listen to other people. And then being catapulted into all this success in your banking role also gave you the ability to understand what people must go through when their identity is so closely tied with their work, and how that can make them feel lost or empty or aimless at times. So all of those things needed to exist in order for you to be here now and to do the work that you're doing now.
And when we think about ourselves, kind of like this beat up in the best possible way, cognac colored suitcase, like the old fashioned, really expensive ones that you find in antique shops. And they're slightly weathered, but they're better for it. And all the experiences that you've ever had, whether, as I said, from me working in the funeral home, like you think about all the jobs you may have had at the beginning and all the experiences that you have and all the heartbreaks that you have and those marvelous moments of places and people who have lit you up and nourished you. All of those things that we constantly are putting into that suitcase of self. We bring that to every situation, every relationship, and it's such a treasure trove of delights. And we forget that because it's so easy to compare ourselves to somebody else's suitcase.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, oh, they have the Louis Vuitton version, or they're this, and I'm this beat up old cognac leather thing, or, whatever. It's just so easy to be side-eyeing, and it takes us out of our enoughness. And I think realizing there's something to do with, maybe it is being a parent, maybe it's being in a certain season of your life, maybe it's just thinking, if not now, then when. Maybe it's the menopause that changes all of your hormone settings and, every day is a new adventure. I don't know what it is, but I love being in this season right now because I really feel connected to what matters.
Yeah.
I feel deeply humble. I feel deeply powerful. And I realize that the secret sauce is in each of us because we're the only ones that have that unique collection of experiences and the ways of seeing the world. And there's gifts there. We can admire somebody else's zinging, activated life force without it taking anything away from our own. But still, that resonance energetically, it's like, I see you zinging over there doing your thing.
Yeah.
And it can be activating positively. It can be galvanizing. It can be motivating. It can be inspiring. And I think to keep throwing fire blankets on our uniqueness and are like, oh, I'm not doing it the way that Netta's doing it, or I'm not, she's so glamorous and she's so this, she's so accomplished. I think realizing when we do that we're actually moving ourselves away from our life force. There are certain things that stoke life force and there are certain things that remove us from it. And that might be a fun adventure to think about, like, what is it that moves you closer and closer to a fuller, more activated life force?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by using that as a come from. Like, I purposely want to live my life with more activations in that way.
Yeah. When you keep saying come from, this wasn't one of the questions this wasn't one of the notes the Mandyisms that I wrote down, but you keep referring to it. Can you give us a very clear example? So when people walk away, they have a definition, this come from definition that they can pay attention to for themselves.
We all have a series of come froms. And I've learned this from some of my coaching colleagues who are women of color, for example, that we have a cultural come from, right? So that's one way of looking at it. I also think we have an enoughness come from, whereby if we disable the autopilot through which we've gone through life, sometimes it's about learning how to fit in, or, we have these unspoken commandments of how we move through the world. And I call them the 13 Sucky Commandments of not enoughness, right? And once we deactivate those things, and I'll share them with you in a minute if you like, those 13 Sucky Commandments, you can then choose how you're going to populate your come from, your enoughness come from. Like I said, I choose to optimize for connection and being of service. I choose to notice when all the seductiveness of comparing myself to someone else is there. It's like, oh, just a little bit, just a little bit. Let yourself compare yourself to her just a little bit. But I know that's going to move me away from my felt sense of wholeness. So I just stop it. I'm not going to give that any energy. So it's an intentionality of where I'm choosing to focus myself, my time, my energy, my purpose, all of those things. And for me, that's meant disabling that autopilot so that I don't come from those 13 sucky commandments of not enoughness, which I can share. You want to hear them?
Yes, I do.
All right, buckle up.
Okay.
Number
I'm
1,
buckled.
I must fixate on my mistakes and even point them out to others. How often has that been a come from?
Yikes. Yeah.
Number 2, I must disbelieve compliments. They're just being nice or they want something from me. Number 3, I must constantly feel like I don't fit in. Number 4, I must avoid burdening anyone with my requests for help and support. Number 5, I must stay in perpetual busyness to avoid irrelevance. I call that phobia, fear of being irrelevant. Number 6, I must avoid rest and relaxation, or at least feel twisted and gnarled with guilt whilst doing it. Number 7, I must be excellent, but never enjoy or celebrate my wins. Next. Number 8, I must find constant fault with my appearance and fixate on my flaws. Number 9, I must put myself under extreme pressure to be exceptional, to outrun ordinariness and mediocrity, but it's a game I'll never win. So I will just feel terrible. Okay. Number 10, I must find others' shares of vulnerability endearing and human, but the same rules do not apply to me. Oh, heavens, no. Number 11, I must defer happiness to the future for when I've, and I'm air quoting here, when I've earned it. That's code for never. Number 12, I must avoid the frivolity of feelings, especially anger. It's so unbecoming for a woman. Number 13, I must constantly compare myself to others and obsess on all the ways in which I'm losing and a loser.
Wow. Yikes. I'm going to, if I can, I'd like to get those from you and put them in the show notes, because it's easy, depending on the mood you're in when you're listening to this, it's easy to dismiss some of them. And yet I believe all of us have experienced all of them at some point. And so to be able to refer to them and to know that these are lies. These are lies we tell ourselves. These are things that if we are aware of them, we can come from a different place when we hear them, when we experience them, when we say them to ourselves. So thank you for sharing those. Very profound, not surprisingly. So I want to ask you about your superpower. We've talked about all these sort of Mandyisms, and we've learned a lot from you based on your experience. But what do you believe as a coach has been your very particular superpower in terms of helping people to, I don't want to say necessarily transform because I don't know why they came to you, right? But to move, to shift into a positive space?
I think it's a self-belief and a self-trust that the person sitting in front of me has deep intelligence about who they are and what they need, even if they don't know it yet. So my role, my superpower is trusting that I don't need to hustle. I don't need to take them on some sort of a complicated adventure for them to discover themselves. There's such a superpower in being really, really present and creating this space in which somebody can experience their own wisdom, their own heart intelligence, their own gut intelligence, where they can hear themselves. There's something about the quality of presence that one holds that allows somebody's own inner knowing to bubble up. And that doesn't mean that I don't ask questions. Like we don't just sit in silence for 60 minutes.
Sure.
Though that would be like a total Jedi level coaching.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not going to speak for an hour and see what happens. But that's a North Star for me. I don't know how well I'm doing at that because it's not like I have people with a clipboard rating me on that afterwards. But I know that magic can happen in a space where somebody is deeply present and actively listening and being in the trusting that you know what's best for you.
What a gift. What a gift to give people in a world that has a hard time listening and allowing people to trust themselves. And I'm sure it's the very specific questions that you ask. It's not the complicated ones. It's the specific ones. It's the thoughtful ones. It's the ones that take their own history that you've listened to in account. Yeah, what a gift. We should all be so lucky to have a Mandy in our corner. And how has this work of coaching liberated you? It's what we're talking about here on Liberty Road. How is that work of working with others, of seeing yourself come to life as a coach, of seeing your gifts and talents sort of shine? How has that liberated you?
I think there's something about realizing the power of being versus doing. Because I always thought if I just did more, if I accomplished more, if I achieved more, if I had more trophies and shiny things, more accolades, more letters behind my name, if I could just find ways to be even more productive, I always thought that was going to be the key that turned the lock of freedom and peace. But actually, that just took me into a cataclysmic burnout. So I think the liberating piece around realizing that coaching, I'm not saying that you don't have to do stuff in coaching, you clearly do, but I'm extremely conscious about the power of silence, the power of being, the power of what seems so stupid simple is real presence. And when you're at the receiving end of real presence, it's not just me coaching, but also me being coached by some extraordinary coaches. Being deeply listened to feels a lot like being loved. Because we experience it so rarely. Most people listen to respond. Like as soon as you draw breath, they're in there with their point.
Yeah.
But that idea of having someone create space for you, it's deeply, deeply rewarding. And I think to know that I can be at the receiving end of that, but I can also provide that not only for clients, but on my podcast, in my family, in friendships, that's a come from for me to listen deeply, to make people feel heard, even if I don't agree. And then the power of asking questions. It's so freeing because it frees you from judgments and wrong conclusions and, putting people in boxes. So there's a freedom. It's been an unlock to see the power of questions in action too.
Yeah. Well, it's no surprise that what has liberated you has liberated so many others. I guess that it's almost like we're circling back to the beginning of the conversation, that in your enoughness, you've been so much more for others. Thank you, Mandy, for this time and for hanging out with us and sharing all your Mandyisms. I so appreciate it.
It's been really a beautiful conversation. I feel really good right now.
Good.
I'm singing with Life
so
Force.
Glad I'm singing too. And Liberty listeners, thank you guys for hanging out with me and with Mandy. We will have her 13 commandments and all the ways that you can connect with her and her podcast so that you too can get your share of Mandyisms on a regular basis. And we will talk to you guys next week. Bye for now.